Before I get started with this episode about becoming a physician after you've graduated pharmacy school, I want to talk to you about just what the road ahead is for someone who's going to be a residency applicant. Because I don't think most students really understand the actual likelihood that they will fail. And that word even is something that's just not even in their vocabulary. It's inconceivable, if you want to go to the Princess Bride quote or whatever. But when you are talking about getting into medical school, half of them are not going to get in. And that is something that you have never seen. Because pharmacy school, to get into pharmacy school, 82% get in. And then those in pharmacy school say, oh, pharmacy school is so hard. Well, if pharmacy school was so hard, why do 88% make it through? So it can't be that hard. So once you get through those two, okay, now you're going to get to the true thing, which is, okay, around 8,000 are going to apply for residencies, or at least, kind of pay their money to be in there. And immediately, 1,600 will be removed from that because they won't get an interview. And then another 2,400 will be removed as you move toward after match day. So one half of people will fail. And this is inconceivable for someone who has always succeeded. And what that does is it creates a terrible, terrible confidence that shouldn't be there. And Mark Twain really said it best. He said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And many of you think, okay, I know how to get a residency. I know the steps. My school has done this and that, and I'm going to get one. Well, that's where I really want you to listen to what Nathan has to say, because he applied to 34 medical schools. That's 34 applications while going to pharmacy school in his APPEs and finishing Physics 2, because that was a requirement that wasn't there for pharmacy school. I can't tell you how proud I am of his effort and how smart it was to do what he did in terms of retaking the MCAT, understanding what he did. But what I'm concerned about the bulk of those applying to residency is that you have never been challenged in this way. And worse, you don't have the data to know what your applications really are. And what I mean by that is, when he was applying to medical school, he could look at the percentages and know, okay, I'm applying to these schools, these are reach schools, I'm applying to these schools, these are mid-tier, and so forth. You don't have that data. You don't have what percentage of people get a residency at a certain site, and you don't know what the relationships are between the applicants and the people there. Yeah, you can see at certain schools that if you're at one school, you have a much better chance because that's where they pull their residents from, and in another school you would be in a much poorer stead. But my concern is that you have not failed. And because you have not failed, you do not have the drive that you need to put those 12 to 18 applications together for residency. I don't mean just, okay, I'm just going to do one and then I just, keep going. You have to make each of those applications as if it was your only choice. And what he did by applying to 34 schools was really absolutely solidifying that I mean it. I really want to become a physician. And so many, and it's just tragic to me to get those emails and see those that I know were qualified, but they didn't feel that they had to do that extra work. They applied to only 4 because that's what it paid. That's what the application fee paid for. Or they applied to only the best because they felt that they should only accept the best schools or the best residency sites. So before we get started, I want to tell you a quick story. We started off this soccer season, and I'm talking about my three daughters, in a friendlies tournament. And it was just a couple of the local clubs and then a couple from out of state. And we have two teams, and we switch a lot, and the focus is really on the player. It's not on creating the mega team. So our intention is a little bit different than the team I'm going to talk about in a minute. First game, we played, we won 4-0. Everybody's cheering, great, all is well. We're continuing from last year, great success. The next morning, we have a 0-0 tie until the last 30 seconds, and we end up losing 1-0. Okay, we fought well during the game, 1-0. That's, it's tragic at the end, but still we're competitive. Next game, win 4-0, all is well. And then comes this elite team. And this elite team, as soon as the game started, you just saw how well coached they were and exactly where they kind of were. And you're like, oh my gosh, we're 11U, so kids are 10 and under. And we're looking at a team and we're seeing things that, maybe a 12 or 13U team would do. And we're seeing it early. And we're like, whoa. And then all of them had power. And you're like, oh my gosh. And what they did was they created the mega team. They weren't focusing on the individual. They were like, okay, well, we want to create the very, strongest team we can, and it's going to travel, pretty far. They had traveled, I think, 3 or 4 hours to just get to this tournament. My concern with all of you guys applying is that you have not failed like that. And to get beaten 8-0, to just have it where, even when we did get the ball across the half line, that they had so much speed coming after us and that we just weren't ready for it. And it was the worst and best thing that happened to us all season. It was the worst in that really, if we're playing a team that is of that caliber, then let's see if we can't put our kids together on the same team for a while for them to get some coordination with each other. But it was the best thing that could have happened because we saw how good someone can be at that age group. And it gave us something to really, strive for. And what I'm really disappointed with is that there is no way for you to actually see that caliber of residency applicant. The applicant who's putting in 12 to 18. The applicant who last year had to start turning down interviews because they had, I want to say it was 17 interviews. And they had to turn them down because they were just kind of getting in the way of each other. They still had to complete their rotation. And to get to that level and to see what that's like and to see what that person did. And the thing is that these are steps that you can take. You can get there, just as I know that the kids on our team would be able to get to that level and would be able to create those moves and all of that stuff. But it just was kind of broke my heart to see it. But what really breaks my heart is that you have not failed. And what I love about this interview and I love about what Nathan did was that he did literally everything that he could to succeed. And I'm very excited to introduce this episode because I am really hoping that what you get out of this is that this is what it takes to get a residency. This is what it takes to put in 100%. And this is what it takes to be confident for match day. So without further ado, here we go. All right, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I'm excited to have Nathan Gartland on, who is made the move from pharmacy student, pharmacy graduate to physician to medical student and eventually physician. So Nathan, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Tony. I'm really excited to be here today and to kind of share my experience.
I'm excited to have you. And if you could tell us just a little bit about your your path, and also maybe include the geography a little bit, because I know you went to Duquesne, which is in Pennsylvania, and now you're in upstate New York. But tell me a little bit about, kind of where you came from and how you kind of got to where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start things off, I started into pharmacy school. My father was in like, he basically worked a little bit with it, through his current position. And so he's like, oh, this is a great career path. And it certainly is. So I went to Duquesne for, 6 years, to 2+4 program. And then I finished out in 2020, so about a year or so ago. And then I had this epiphany, I guess, during my second year of professional school. So fourth year of pharmacy school, or PY2 for all the different terminologies. And I decided that, like medicine was a possibility, and I really wanted to pursue it. And so I ended up kind of applying through pharmacy school. I went on all my interviews during rotations, and ended up at the Jacobs School of Medicine in Buffalo, New York. So it's been a pretty long process, and obviously it continues on after that. But I'm a second year medical student right now, and it's just been a really great experience throughout everything. I don't like regret going to pharmacy school by any means. It's gotten me where I need to be today. So I am so thankful for that experience.
Okay, well, let's start off with kind of the big thing that students are going to have is that when we talk about residency match rates, when you're talking, what you'll be doing in your fourth year, you're going to probably, from a school like Buffalo, you're probably going to have a 95 to 96% match rate, somewhere around there. Whereas students are going to a 68% match rate in pharmacy. But that doesn't really take into account the number of people in pharmacy school, because only about, I want to say it's a little closer to 27% of students go into a residency after pharmacy school. So the first question is, why didn't you just do a residency and be done in a year? Why did you decide to go 4 years med school, 3 years residency after that? Because I think the shortest is about 3 years usually. So
Yep.
you added 7 years instead of one. That's just a big leap. Just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that, because that's kind of what many of because to the people that would get a residency would get into med school. So I feel like that would be a similar kind of group of people. How do you make that decision or life decision?
Yeah, I mean, Tony, that's a loaded question right there. But so I guess I went on a medical mission trip in
Okay.
my fourth year, like I mentioned, and I really worked with a lot of, I basically served the role as a physician while I was down there,
Okay.
just because of the lack of resources and whatnot. And that was like my first exposure to diagnostic care. And so that was one of the big, epiphanies that I had, is like, wow, I really loved, diagnosing XYZ. Obviously, we were working under the purview of, a current physician who was down there, but it was just an incredible experience. And as we know, as pharmacy school progresses, things have gotten so much more clinical just over the last 10 years.
Sure.
And so I was really fascinated by like all the material we were learning in pharmacy school. And I actually was planning on applying to residencies. That had been my, career goal for a very long time. And then, after those experiences with the diagnostic work, I had a mentor who actually did the same career path as I did beforehand, who kind of led me, down this unique niche, I should say, of medicine, and encouraged me to pursue, these next steps. And so he worked with me. I got to shadow him, and I got to see like how incredible he was as a physician, using his, his pharmacy knowledge, which compared to all of the other physicians he worked with, none of them were even close in comparison. And so I found it just fascinating that, I could combine these two, very specialized career paths and put them together, and to optimize patient care. It was just a really cool experience for me to see that. And so, but yeah, for, your constituency who you're, broadcasting to, they're definitely qualified as a resident, as a first year. If they're qualified to get a residency in pharmacy, they're certainly qualified to get into a medical school. And so I saw the path of, essentially I could do 1 year of, pharmacy residency, and then I was likely going to do a second year of pharmacy residency, because I was interested in PGY2s and I wanted to specialize. And, I figured that, why not try to go to medical school, see how things go. And, and basically the rest is history. Things kind of fell into place as they went. And, I got accepted to my first medical school before I even had to apply to any pharmacy residencies through Forecast. And so I kind of followed that pathway. Obviously, there was a lot of consideration to take in, obviously opportunity cost of, potential income, of, the extra years of, education and time and whatnot. So those are all major factors. But I'm very grateful that I made the decision that I did. I'm actually still working as a pharmacist currently. So even if you wanted to, still hold on to your pharmacy background, you can still work during medical school. It's the funny thing about it is medical school and pharmacy school are very similar with regards to the rigor, coursework, whatnot, other than the extra clinical year that you have to do instead of an extra course year.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's talk about some of the separators, because if you're, and I'm going to guess that your MCAT was somewhere around 510 to 512.
Spot on. 510.
Okay. Yeah. Because that puts you around 80th to 85th percentile. I want to say closer to 85th percentile, which is a very different deal. That most of the pharmacy schools have gotten rid of the PCAT. 25% still have them. But tell me a little bit about studying for the MCAT, because the MCAT tests things really which are preparatory for pharmacy school rather than in. So you kind of had to take a step back, make a commitment to, make sure that you knew your physics, your biochem, your chem, which, as we're, as more communication skills, honestly, in pharmacy, as we're talking to patients much more. Tell me a little bit about how you kind of took that step and fit in that studying for the MCAT, because I hear that, it's about a 300-hour process, somewhere around there, to prepare for the MCAT.
Yeah, and that's definitely my one of the biggest things. One of the biggest factors in getting into medical school is doing well on the MCAT. Obviously, a good GPA, and there's a few other factors, but we can touch on those later. But yeah, the MCAT is, the most important, if factor of getting in. It's basically the score that hangs above your head, and everyone who sees that is going to have some kind of objective understanding of how intelligent so and so. Not to say that it's the one defining principle, but it's a major factor. And so the biggest thing for like for your viewers and whatnot who are listening to this is, take the MCAT seriously the first time, and you really do have to commit a lot of hours to it. And there's good timing of when to do it and when not to do it. So for instance, in the middle of the semester of a busy academic pharmacy semester, not the best place or time or place to do that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I did have to do that because, so long story short, I took the MCAT the first time around, and I wasn't committed to it. I was thinking, I'll just give it a try and see where, it takes me. And, like you mentioned, it's very, very biology, basic science focused, as well as just the format of the test is just a very fast-paced, fast-moving test. So you really have to have a good understanding of the material.
And it's like 8 hours now, right?
Yeah,
8 hours. Yeah,
7 hours and 30 minutes, I believe.
Okay, all right,
so it's
pretty long.
It's a pretty beefy test, so it's no joke. And so, I really didn't have that appreciation for how important that test was. So for any of your, listeners, I would recommend, if you are planning on, taking this test, you really do have to take it seriously. It is a little challenging in the sense that I took it, from my PY2 year into my PY3 year. So during the summer. And during that time, I was really focused on that, but we had gotten so clinical with our coursework that I figured that, that information would really translate well into the test. And unfortunately, it doesn't, because the test is structured not for, advanced practice, clinicians like, or,
Sure.
Pharmacy graduate students, but it's more for the undergraduate population. Organic chemistry is a common concept, physics, properties like that. So it's certainly a challenging process. And that's partly why I wrote the book too, because it is really, really important. So that's why I wish I took it more seriously the first time around. I wish I knew that it was as important as it is. And then I ended up having to take it a second time, and that was, quite as miserable as the first. But yeah, it's a really important test. It really needs to be handled well. And I think like anyone listening should just focus heavily on that. And it requires just getting the textbooks and just reading through them and memorizing a lot of content. And that's about, not to get into the weeds on this, but that's about 50% of the battle is, memorizing and learning the content. The other half is just figuring out the style of the test. That you only have a minute and 30 seconds per question. You have to move on, and it's just a muscle. You have to work on that and build, progress through the test. If you can't figure it out, you got to answer it and go back later if you have time, but usually you don't. So it's really important that you just figure out those test logistics, stay on top of those things, and you really have to practice.
So tell me a little bit about, aren't you taking USMLE Step 2 coming up?
Yes. Yep. So for your listeners, basically USMLE Step 1, and there's Step 2, and then there's also a Step 3. And these are basically our boards for medical school boards. So you take Step 1 at the end of your second year. So I have a couple months before I take Step 1. And then at the end of your third year of medical school, you take Step 2. And then I believe Step 3, I haven't gotten there yet, obviously, but I believe you take it. It's like your final residency boards. So you take that during residency, to my understanding, but I'd have to double check on that.
Okay. And then in terms of residency, for the big problem that we have with residency is pharmacy, is that we really don't have a metric like the USMLE to kind of say, okay, well, this is where they are. And I know they tried to do that with the PICOA, but that became a thing. So tell me a little bit about how scoring on the USMLE factors into residency. I know that you haven't taken the test yet and that the residencies are, down the road, but just in general, that it's just maybe some contrast between the importance of testing during medical school versus pharmacy school.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually funny you mentioned that. It's one of the hottest topics right now in the medical school world, because as of recently, USMLE Step 1 is now pass fail. So we are the first class who will be taking it, and the scores are blinded. So there will be no more scores for USMLE Step 1. So basically, we're in no man's land at this point. Residency programs don't really know what to make of that either, because USMLE 1, for the viewers, is pretty much the most important test, traditionally speaking, for placement in residencies. Obviously, other factors, like being smart, basically on your feet, a good diagnostician, other properties, just being, fun to work with is also important. But Step 1 is, was the defining principle, and they just got rid of it this past year. So not really sure how to answer that quite yet, but
okay,
I'll have to get back to you and once I take it, and once I get down the road. Okay. But yeah, it's interesting.
I remember, for anyone that's not watched it, Doctor's Diaries is like the DVD from PBS that you can get, and it follows these students in like the late 80s and how they did. And then they just had a recent one, like 25 years later, then they looked and saw how they were doing, in life and things like that. And I just remember just vividly how adamant they were that the USMLE did not measure anything that had to do with how well they were going to be a physician. And I think that was kind of part of the debate. Like, look, there are other things that you should be measuring, not, how I did in my, histo class or my biochem class or things like that. So I think I understand both sides of it a little bit. Well, let's talk about your book, because you did take the time to write a complete book on how to become a physician from becoming a pharmacist. And how did you carve the time to write an entire book during medical school?
It was pretty crazy, but fortunately we do get one summer off between our first year and second year. And so the day we finished exams, I started drafting the book, and I actually finished it about 2 weeks before we got back. So it's been a busy summer for me, but I had put together a very small manuscript right after I'd finished the application process. Okay. Just a quick checklist of how miserable like XYZ was, or like why was it so difficult to do this. Yeah. And I kind of used that as my template for the book. And it basically just highlights some of the major, pitfalls that a lot of students like myself, fall into. And every year there's one or two pharmacy students who, graduates from the class who decides they want to continue their education, whether it's, in medical school, whether it's, MBA, PhD, who knows, but it seems to be a growing trend. Obviously residency is, very popular as well. But yeah, it just highlights a lot of those pitfalls, how to kind of save money on some of the, processes. Definitely don't apply it, like read the fine print before you apply to schools. Some of it's common sense, some of it's, not as intuitive, especially to someone who's never gone through an application process like this before. Obviously the forecast is kind of similar in that extent. So this is more geared towards like the younger, population who is listening in, but there's definitely a lot of key things. Each chapter, I have like the medical school blueprint, how to kind of, are you going to even make the cut? Is this worth, looking into? How to, there's a defined schedule that I recommend you use, on when you should be applying to this, when you should be doing XYZ, MCAT, principles, primary application, secondary application, Casper exam, osteopathic schools of medicine, and so much more. And so, and ironically, the interview process was, the easiest section to write, just because pharmacy school really fosters a lot of professionalism. And I found that a lot of my, my peers who have gone to medical school too, afterwards, from pharmacy school have also just excelled in their interviews, just because of, pharmacy school is a graduate level program. And so it's really a huge leg up. So the hardest part is getting, the application put together and checking all the boxes. And once you get through that, you're golden.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of a shame that they put specialized health and put them all together. You were one of the 721 out of, I think, 1,964 that applied with some kind of health science degree. And it's kind of a shame they lump everybody together. They don't say, okay, well, if you're a pharmacy school graduate, then this was your chance. Or if you're, a nursing school graduate, this was your chance. But I guess I just love the reason you went to med school. I had a not classmate in my own class, but in a different class who, put it in one sentence. He's like, well, you can't do surgery as a pharmacist. I'm like, that's true. And he ended up going to the I call it the Dr. Seuss school, but I don't remember. It's the Seuss school over in Hanover, Dartmouth, I guess. And he ended up going through there, but yeah, so it's kind of funny that I don't even think Dr. Seuss was a physician. I'm not even sure if he was, but just kind of a really neat story as well. Well, this is what I really want to kind of get into, which is, so you've gone through what is an immensely rigorous process of applying to something, to medical school versus residency. How did you continue to work with your, kind of professors, with the people that you're working with at the sites, make time for it? Because what I keep seeing over and over again is so many people that would have gotten into residency are kind of leaving it till December last minute and kind of, nixing their chances. How did you maybe spread it out, or what do you recommend in terms of time management, all those things that allowed you to do what is a crazy amount of hard work to get to a goal that you really wanted?
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote a whole chapter on with timing and scheduling, and that's one of the primary reasons that a lot of people don't get into medical school is they applied late. It's all a numbers game, especially with with residencies and whatnot too. Like you're mentioning, it's really important to stay up on top of that. Even if you have to write an essay each night for medical school, you got to do it. You got to stick to it. And it's kind of keeping that consistency. It's just like a habit. After you do it for about a month, it's pretty easy. It's second nature at that point. But yeah, really keeping a schedule is so important. The medical school application process, it opens in, I believe it's June, early June, if not late May. And, you need to have your application ready to go at that point. And then you can submit by July, and then the schools go out and whatnot. All of your applications are dispersed. So it's really important that you just stay up on that. It was challenging for sure, to write. I applied to 34 schools.
What?
34 medical schools. Yeah. It was quite a bit. I don't recommend that much in the book itself. I was just, being a little neurotic. I was concerned about my first MCAT score being, something that would weigh me
Okay.
down. So I applied a little more broadly. But yeah, I applied. So I had to write, every secondary application that came with that had approximately 6 to 8 essays. So just doing the math, it's close to 100 essays, individual essays that you have to write out, and they have to be perfectly, edited and whatnot. So yeah, I did probably 3 or 4 per night, trying to stay out in that scheduled window. And it was challenging after rotation, after spending 8, sometimes 10-hour days on a challenging rotation. Um, but it's something you get through. If you really want to do it and you really want to go through it, then just like any pharmacy student who's completing a residency, you get through each day one step at a time.
No, I
You know,
love it. Yeah, they say 75% of medical school interviews go to those that applied before August. So there is a true, like, if you apply early, you're in. Well, you're not in, but your chances are better. Your chances are
yeah,
better for sure.
100%. There's
Yeah,
only 150 slots at every single medical school, and they get 1,000 applications day one. The cycle opens. They have to look through all of those, and if you're 2 days late, you're at the bottom of that 2,000 pile of applications, and so it's really, really important. Obviously having a good MCAT, they filter things a little bit. If you have, like, the top MCAT percentile, then you're going to be at the top of the list depending on what medical school you're at.
sure.
And other schools, though, don't even really care. They just want a holistic applicant who has some well-rounded experiences and really is passionate about medicine, about healthcare in general. So having a pharmacy background really, really helps a lot of applicants. And it's interesting too, with the article that you mentioned, is, I wish they did have it broken down to, how many, because it was 36.7% of health science applicants
Yeah.
actually matriculated. But if you look at the stats of, like, the mean MCAT, the average of those applicants was a 503, which is very, very far below, the average
Hmm.
MD acceptance rate. So it's just it just emphasizes how important, the MCAT is. But yeah, it's just been a phenomenal process for sure.
And I know you went through the interview process, but can you tell me how you answered the question, why do you want to be a doctor? And I know that the answer is to help people, but I'm sure you did better than that. How did you answer that question when it came to you?
So by far, this is the most asked question you will ever receive. I'd show up to interviews, and the barista at the coffee shop would be like, "Why are you here?" Like, you're a pharmacist, you should be working right now.
Right.
But yeah, it's really just focuses down on, like, your personal experiences. I really talked about that. I emphasized the medical mission trip, working with, patients hands-on. And I was really interested in, like, the diagnostic approach to medicine. It's more of like a mystery when it comes to working with these patients. Sometimes they'll come into the ER, and you have to figure out what's going on. And I really love that ability to do that. So, and then not only do I figure out how to, figure out what their disease or what their ailment is, but then I can use my pharmacy background to, utilize that medication knowledge. Like, oh, they need, XYZ, they need Haldol, they need, so and so. So I really love to kind of merging these two specialties together. And this question, by far, you definitely need to have a rock solid answer for this, because everyone will ask you. I got asked it on every single interview by every interviewer who interviewed me. But it's a
And
tongue
I think,
twister there.
yeah, I think they're just naturally curious too, because it's like, all right, here's another student, here's another interview, but you really, and the students that I help, they're, why do you want to do a residency, which is, a similar thing, but and we've got our own cliche of to work at the top of my license, but what you apparently did was said, all right, well, let me just top that by going to a new license where there are other things that I can do. So let's say you had to pick a specialty today, and I know this can change. What specialty do you think you would be applying into in the residency match in your fourth year?
It really depends on, I guess, what I can use my pharmacy background knowledge in. I've focused, but also when it comes to this point in my life, I think like work-life balance is really important. I'm getting older every single day, as the pharmacy students are too. That's why some decide not to
Amen.
go on do a PGY too, because they're just like, wow, that was a lot. I want to settle down and relax a little bit. So with that in mind, emergency medicine, it is a little hectic, work life, but it's 12-hour call and you're out after that. So it has a pretty nice work-life balance in the sense that you're never going to get phoned to show up to the ER because someone else is, shift work. They're taking
Right.
care of it. With that in mind, it's only 3-year residency, so it's kind of shifting me. That's on the shorter end of residency, so I'm kind of interested in that as well. But then on the other end, the complete other end of the spectrum, I'm interested in neuro. So I'm thinking about neurosurgery a little bit. It's very technically based, a lot of diagnostic potential, but still deals with a lot of medications, especially with stroke, a lot of anticoagulation, fixing that, reversals and whatnot. And that's a 7-year residency, so that's a pretty long haul. But you never know. They say once you don't really know what you want to do until you start your 3rd year of rotations in medical
Okay.
school, just because that's when you start to really experience things. Similar to pharmacy school, you don't really know until you get to that 6th year, and then you're like, wow, I really love ambulatory care. Or, oh, I really love community, and so on.
Yeah, no, I love one of the people I helped. She had what she called a quarter life crisis, where she realized that she wanted to do a residency, but it was like her second or third block, and she's like, "Oh, I probably should have thought of this before."
Oh,
But you
geez.
can't. Like that's just not how life works. It's Steve Jobs is the one that said, you can only connect the dots looking backward, and the fact that you actually did all of that stuff during pharmacy school, kudos to you. Just so impressed that you were able to fit it all in, make it happen, and then get into a good medical school. So yeah, just congratulations on that.
Yeah,
What would
thank you.
is I've asked
Um,
you a lot of questions. Is there anything that maybe I should have asked you, or that is something that maybe pharmacy students graduating don't realize about? I don't know. I feel like there's so much pressure to become a resident, and you almost feel like that 75% that didn't become a resident feels like they're somehow less than. And then, of course, as a first generation college student, anyone who doesn't become a physician or attorney always has that less than feeling from their parents for at least a little while, where well, if you had been a doctor or you'd been a lawyer, uh, what I guess what you didn't let that happen, but is there anything that you feel like maybe is a misconception that you kind of had during pharmacy school that you kind of solidified a little bit later as you kind of went to a medical school?
yeah, I mean, I think the big misconceptions is, well, first off, like kind of addressing what you were talking about is you really got to do what makes you happy. If you want to set a goal and you want to achieve that, then, I don't think you should let, barriers or, perceptions from other people, you know, tell you that, that you shouldn't go for it because, it's your life and you got to keep that in your, control. So, I had people in pharmacy school say, wow, you're crazy. Like, what are you doing this for? You're doing the overtime shift. You're working while you're doing, you're studying for the MCAT, doing 8 hours a day on that, and then studying for, an exam in like 2 hours, and you're not doing as good as you could be. Like, why are you doing this to yourself? You don't even know if you're going to get in, and sometimes, you need that pressure to let you realize, like this is important, and I really want to do this, and I'm not going to let anyone stand in my way, and no one was like a direct barrier by any means, but it's just like it's nice to know that like at the end of the day, you did what you wanted to do, even if you get in or you don't get in. Even if you apply for pharmacy residency and you don't get in, like know that you gave it your best, and if you didn't, then try again if that's something you want to do. But then the misconceptions are also that, oh, if I want to do something clinical, then like I have to do a residency. Well, that's not always true. You could do ambulatory care, you could end up doing community and then get put in some clinical position role that 2 years down the road. You never know where life takes you. And so I think just following your dreams is the biggest thing. It sounds so cliche, but it really is so important.
No, the data actually support your follow the dreams. They followed students in high school, and they found that the students that applied to Ivy League schools and that kind of caliber of school, whether they got in or not, had similar success in life. And it sounds like the fact that you had that drive, regardless of you got into medical school or not, you would have been successful in the future. And so I think that that's really the takeaway I'm getting from you and from your book, is that you really need to prioritize the happiness that you'll have from your life. And if that requires a bit of extra work now, and that's just not, that just doesn't even encompass it, but a ton of extra work now, you'll be happier for it later. So I have to say, I'm just so excited for you, and that everything that did work out, and that you are a second-year medical school student now. Well,
yeah, I mean, thank you so much for, having me on the podcast. I really just wanted to share my story, and really reach out to your audience and let them know that, there are other avenues. Maybe it's not pharmacy, maybe it's through business. Maybe it is through pharmacy, and you kind of take a different avenue 10 years later. You never know where life takes you. And, I just want them to know that there's resources out there through this book, and through, just other, people who've done it before you. You can get 10 years worth of experience, in one conversation. And that's just so important.
Absolutely. All right. Well, the book is PharmD to MD, From Pharmacy School to Medical School, a complete guide to getting into medical school, by Nathan M. Gartland. PharmD, and you can get it on Amazon and then other places as well. So Thanks again for being on, and we'll have to kind of touch base in at some time where we kind of find out what that third year is like, and how your process is, because I think there are some PGY1s that do the same thing, kind of do a generalized PGY1. They know exactly where they're going to go, and that changes. And I want to hear whether you end up in the emergency department, in neurology, or neurosurgery, or somewhere different.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again, Tony. And I also want to say I'm currently putting out a website called thephysicianpharmacist.com.
Sweet.
Just has more information about the book. I'm getting into just having people reach out to me if they're curious about their application health and whatnot. But yeah, just basically, insider tips and tricks. And you can also download the first 2 chapters of the book for free. So if you want to, don't want to buy it or anything like that, you'll definitely get a lot of good value from those first 2 chapters, I think. So.
Sweet. And how can they contact you? What's the best way?
Yeah, they can reach out to me at, it is PharmD to MD 2020.
Awesome.
At gmail.com. So basically the book title, no periods or anything like that, just PharmD to MD 2020 at gmail.com.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much for being on.
All right. Thanks a lot, Tony.
So you've heard what it took to get into medical school. I hope that you've really understood what it takes to get into residency, and that instead of trying to just say, okay, well, I just want to get in, I'm busy, I'll do the minimum. What I want you to do is think about the person that is the most competitive applicant at your school, and think, what have they done? Okay. And imagine that you are in an interview and they end up at that interview too. Okay. Have you done the things that you need to do to win the spot there? Okay. And we're imagining that there's just one spot. There are multiple. But what I'm telling you is that it is so competitive when we get there, because this is one half of the school of pharmacy applying, and then 1/4 of all of the graduates will make it. And I want you to succeed, and I don't want you to be there holding just that painful email which says, I'm sorry you didn't match. And to know that if you had just done a little bit more, if you had just done enough to make sure everything was perfect, that you readily could have gotten it. So hopefully after this, no regrets. You've done everything you possibly can, and that you end up at the residency you want. You want to get in touch with me, TonyThePharmacist at gmail.com or residency.teachable.com.